Hello friends, welcome to the complete Next.js 14 tutorial. Next.js is the most popular React framework and it's used by thousands of websites and applications. All these companies trust Next.js because it's so easy to create fast and secure web applications with it. And this tutorial includes everything you need to know about the new version of Next.js, including the app router, server-side and client-side rendering, data fetching, API routes and server actions, authentication, and more. And by the end of the video, you'll have created this full-stack application. We'll create all these pages using the app router, and you'll learn the folder structure and the layouts. After that, we will fetch all these posts from our database, and you'll understand the static and dynamic data fetching, caching, and revalidating. Then we will implement the authentication. We will be able to log in and register with social media accounts or user credentials, and log out using this button. And you'll see how easy it is to protect routes on the server side using custom user roles and Next.js middleware. Right now I'm not authenticated, and if I try to reach the posts, I'll be redirected to the login page because only users can access the data. And if I log in as an admin, this button will show up and I'll be able to reach the admin dashboard. And in this dashboard, I can remove users and posts or add new ones. And during this process, we don't have to refresh the page or use any library to see the changes because we are gonna be using the new server actions. Thanks to this awesome feature, we can mutate our data on the server side. I will also show you Next.js API routes, and we'll compare the cons and pros of server actions and API routes. This tutorial is gonna teach you everything to create a full stack web application, but if you wanna go deeper and learn every little detail of React and Next.js, I invite you to join the React Next.js Master Course waitlist. If you are interested, the link will be in the description below. And after joining the waitlist, please let me know what your expectations are, because I want to give you the maximum benefit instead of just recording regular tutorials. Okay, after this information, if you are ready, let's get started. Okay, I created a new folder, and inside this folder, let's install our Next.js application. Let's open up the Next.js documentation, nextjs.org, and I will click on Get Started, and I will say Installation. Before starting, make sure that Node.js is installed on your computer, but if you are watching this video, you probably already have. After that, we will create our new app using this command. I will copy and open up my terminal, and I will paste my code. I will install everything inside this folder, so I will say dot. If you don't write dot, it's gonna create a new folder. I don't wanna do that. I will say enter, and it's gonna provide some options that we can choose. You can use TypeScript or JavaScript. We are gonna be using ESLint. It basically allows us to see our potential errors before running our application, and it's gonna save a lot of time. You can choose Tailwind or plain CSS. But it's not our concern for this tutorial because we will not be primarily focusing on the design part. I want to use the source directory. It helps me to organize my files. I will explain this in a moment. We are going to be using app router, of course. We don't have to customize our imports. And it's going to install our app. And it's ready. This is how we can create a Next app. But if you do that, it's gonna install some unnecessary files, HTML elements that we are not gonna use, and some styles. So before starting, we have to delete all these items. And also, when you use this command, it's gonna install the latest version. But if you watch this video after the release date, it might be a different version. And if you want to prevent any potential errors, I highly recommend you use my GitHub repository. The link will be in the description below. Just find this branch and use this repo for this tutorial. Because I will show you some experimental Next.js features also, so even if those features become stable, you will be able to run your application without any problem. So you can come here and download this repository and open up your folder with VS Code. But you are a developer, so you should get used to using Git. So instead of downloading, come here and copy this URL and use this URL in your terminal. Firstly, I'm gonna delete everything here. And of course, I should delete the Git folder. Otherwise, we will not be able to clone any other GitHub repository. And you can say git clone and this URL. But the better way is fork this repository. So you can create your own repo, and using this repo, you can keep track of your progress. Because it will be a long tutorial, so you can commit your changes daily. So after doing that, come here and copy your own URL. So again, I will say git clone is gonna be your URL and dot and enter. If you have any problem here, instead of using the same folder, just create a new one and clone your repository. Okay, as you can see, we don't have our libraries. Let's install them using npm install. And our application is ready. Let's start. I will say npm run and dev. So it's gonna run our application in the development mode. As you can see, our app is running on this port number. Let's open up. And that's all. We don't have any default HTML elements. Our page is here, so we are gonna create everything from scratch. But before that, let me explain the folder structure. We have some configuration files here. Package.json shows our dependencies. Inside next.config.js, we are gonna write our Next.js configurations. So we will be able to use Next.js experimental features, or we will be able to use different URLs to show our images. You are gonna see all of them later. Inside JavaScript configuration, as you can see, it provides a default path, and it's gonna be our source folder. So instead of writing the exact path, we can use this sign and import our files. What I mean by that? If you remember when we use React, we were calling our components something like that. Import navbar, for example, and from the previous folder and maybe other folders, and finally components and our navbar component. But instead of doing this, we can directly say @ sign, and it basically means go to the source folder. And inside this source folder, components and navbar. So in this way, it's much easier to import our files without digging nested folders. And this is gonna be our ESLint rules. When we make our first mistake, you are gonna understand how it works. And inside source directory, we have the app folder. But before that, we have our public folder here. We are gonna have our images, videos, or other media contents. These are our libraries. When we install a new library using our terminal, it's gonna install them here. And this folder includes our cached application. When we make any change, it's gonna cache our files. And when we build our app, our build folder will be here. Okay, so let's talk about the app router. It's the biggest feature of Next.js because we don't have to worry about routing. Let me show you how it works. App router allows us to navigate between our pages easily. In React, we need a library and some configurations to do that, but in Next.js, we are able to do this by using the app folder. And we can create all our pages using this app directory. Let's say we have 4 main pages. It's gonna be the home page, about page, contact page, and the blog page. And I'm gonna write their path names, which are the part of the URL that come after the domain name, like / about, contact, and blog. So we can navigate between pages using these path names. The only thing I should do is create the page folder inside the app directory. For example, for the home page, we don't need to create any folder because we don't have any path name. So I'm gonna create here a file, and the file name has to be page, and the extension can be JS or JSX, or if you are using TypeScript, TS or TSX. This name is important because this is how Next.js know that we are creating a page, not a component. And for the About page, I should create a subfolder. And the name of the folder will be this path name. So I can do the same thing for the contact page and the blog page. Contact and blog. This is how we are creating our pages. But what if we have some nested routes? Let's say in the About page we have 2 more pages. Let's create here a child page. It's gonna be about company and maybe about career. We can create these child pages easily because AppRouter allows us to create nested folders. So I'm gonna come here. Let's move them. And I'm gonna create my child folders. About and company, about and career. But what if our page names are dynamic? For example, in the blog page, when we create any blog post, the post names will be like blog and the ID of the post or the Slack name, like that. Let's create one more, and it's gonna be, let's say, another post. So these names are dynamic. We cannot create here a folder because they come from the database and we don't know the names. It's really easy to create dynamic routes. The only thing I should do is create here a new folder, and I'm gonna write my dynamic route name inside a square brackets. It can be ID or Slack or whatever you want, but we are using here Slack, so I will say Slack dynamic route. So whenever we visit our domain name /blog / the post name, the Next.js is gonna run this page. So even if we try to visit a post that doesn't exist, this page is gonna run. And we will try to find the post using this Slack. If it doesn't exist, we are gonna return the not found page. But I'm gonna explain this later. Basically, this is the main structure of the AppRouter. So let's see which pages we are gonna create. This is our home page. We will have the About page, contact page. We are gonna have our posts, and we can see our single posts. So this title will be dynamic. So let's create our pages. I'm gonna open up my application and I will say home page, because page.jsx is inside the app directory, let's create other folders. About, and I'm going to create page.jsx. Let's create our function. If you don't know how I'm using this shortcut, you can watch my VS Code video. I explained there how to use your own snippets, and the page name will be about page. So I'm gonna copy this folder and let's create 2 more times, and it's gonna be contact page. I'm gonna change the page.jsx, and it's gonna be blog page. And remember, inside blog, we are gonna have a dynamic route. To do that, I'm gonna be using square parentheses, and inside, let's say Slack, because it's gonna be the post title. And inside, again, page.jsx. Let's say single post page. Let's see. This is our home page. I will say about. Perfect. Contact. Blog page. And we are going to have our posts. Let's say title 1. Okay. Let's try another one. And it works. So what else we have? We are going to have an admin page, and if we are not logged in, we'll be able to visit the login page. Let's create them also. I'll create 2 more folders here, and it's going to be admin, and login page. But let's assume that we are going to have a register page, or let's say forgot password page. So these 3 pages are related to authentication. In this kind of application, it's not hard to find them because we don't have many pages, but imagine you have 20 pages, 30 pages, and you want to make some changes on your authentication pages, like login, register, or forgot password. And in that situation, it's hard to find them. To prevent this, there is an awesome feature. We can actually group our pages. To do that, I'm going to come here, and I'm going to be using parentheses, and inside, let's say, auth. And I can move my folders inside this folder. Let's choose them and move it here. And right now it's much easier to find our pages. Moreover, it's not gonna count this as a route, so we don't have to use this name. Because normally, remember, we are using nested routes like that, but we don't have to write here the group name. And let's say login page. As you can see, it's not found because it's a group name. We can directly call our login page like that. Okay, we don't have those pages, but anyway, it can stay like that. And right now we can create our first component, and it's gonna be the navbar. Let's open up our app. As you can see, we have navbar here, but if I visit the contact page, about page, or the home page, this navbar is still here, and this footer. So instead of creating our components and using them for every single pages, we can use our layout. Let's open up our app, and I'm gonna close those pages so we can see better. And as you can see, inside app directory, we have layout.js, and this is our main layout, which means whatever I write inside this layout, let's say h1 tag, this is the main layout. So this h1 tag is gonna show up for each pages. Let's test. I'm gonna save. As you can see, login page, contact page, homepage, and it always stays here. Only our content changes. And this content is this children. Basically, it represents all the pages, but this h1 tag will be the common item. As I said, this is the main layout, but also you can create different layouts. For example, let's come here, or let's say block, and I'm gonna create new layout. JS or JSX. Let's create our component. I will say block layout, or whatever you call. And we are gonna take the children. Let's say h2 tag. This is the block layout. And after the children. Let's open up our blog page. As you can see, it's here. And also, if I open up a single post page, as you can see, it's still here. But if I visit different pages, like contact, it's not gonna be here. This is how we can use common components using layouts. But even if you don't have any common component, the layout has to be here. Okay, instead of this h1 tag, let's create our navbar. I'm gonna delete this layout and this h1 tag, and I'm gonna create my first component, and it's gonna be navbar. In the documentation of Next.js, let's come here and choose Learn Next.js, and inside this official example, it uses only app directory, but I prefer using source directory also because in my opinion, app directory should include only routes, only our pages and API routes, nothing else. Because if you create here a component folder and write all the components inside, it's gonna be so confusing to find your components and pages. And in this example, it also uses the libraries, authentication configuration, basically everything inside this app folder. But I highly recommend you to use source folder and move your components and libraries or any other files inside this source directory. And leave only your pages and their styles inside this app directory. Of course, there is not a certain rule. You can do whatever you want, but I prefer using it like that. If you watch my previous dashboard tutorial, I've used only app directory. It was not a good experience for me. I always struggle finding my files and folders. I think this is the best option. Okay, inside components, let's create navbar and navbar.jsx. Be careful here, I'm not using page.jsx because it's a component, not a page. I will create my component, it's gonna be navbar, and inside my layout, I'm gonna use this navbar. And as you can see, this is how we are using this @ sign. It basically says go to the source folder, find the components folder, and inside navbar. So I can do the same thing for the footer. Component and footer, and I'm gonna use it after these children. So we are gonna see navbar, our content, and footer. Let's see. Perfect. Let's open up the home page, and awesome. And I also prefer using folders. You can directly write your components inside this folder without creating any folder. But I prefer this because we can need any subcomponent. And also we are gonna write our styles inside this folder. But even if you use Tailwind, I highly recommend you create a folder because as I said, we are gonna need a subcomponent. For example, in this navbar. Okay. So I'm gonna close everything here. And let's open up navbar. Let's see our app. We are gonna have a logo here and our links. By the way, I'm gonna give here a background color. I know some of you watch this video at night and your eyes hurt, but don't worry, just hold on. I'm gonna give a background when I show you styling. So inside navbar, I'm gonna create a div and it's gonna be our logo and one more div and it's gonna be our links. Let's create our first link here. To do that, we are gonna be using Next.js link component. Normally, we are using an anchor tag, but when using a Next.js, we don't need that. We are going to be using the link component. As you can see, it comes from next link. We will give again href. And here, let's say about page. Another one, let's say contact. We are going to have our home page here. Let's see. Okay, they are here. Using the link component is important because it fetches our pages before we click those links. So when I come here, even if I don't click, it's gonna fetch the contact page. So when I click on this link, I will be able to see my contact page without waiting. Okay, right now, instead of writing our links one by one, I can create here a links array and inside I can pass my links. Actually, let's create a sub component here. I will say links.jsx. I'm going to create my component and here I will create my array. As you can see, each link has a title and path, so I can use them here. I will say links.map and for each link I will call Next.js link and I'm going to write here my title is going to be link.title and I'm going to give href and it's going to be link.path. As you can see, there is a warning here. It comes from ESLint and it says you are missing the unique key. So if you are using a map here, you have to create a unique key. Since our titles and paths are unique, we can use any of them, doesn't matter. Let's say link.title. Okay, let's use this component here. I will say links. And perfect. Our links are here. Oops, in this example, it's posts. But I created blog page, remember? So I'm gonna quickly change here. Or you can change this name. And that's all. I'm gonna delete this link. We don't need this anymore. Let's click again. And it works. So before giving any style, let me show you what other layouts we can use. We can use a loading layout, for example. Inside app folder, I will say loading.jsx. Let's create our component. It's gonna be loading. Basically, when we switch between our pages, instead of seeing a blank white page, firstly, we are gonna see this loading component, this layout, and after loading our components, we are gonna see our page. Of course, in this example, we are not gonna see that because it's too fast. But if I open up my console and choose network here and slow down my connection, let's try to open homepage. As you can see, loading first and after our page. And it provides a better user experience and increases our website performance. And again, as we created our custom layout, you can create your custom loading layout for each page. Just create your loading JSX inside your page. And what else? We have an error layout, error.jsx. So if we encounter any error, we are gonna see this layout. But as you can see, there's a problem here because error.js must be a client component. I'm gonna explain what the client and server components are, but for now, Just don't worry about this and write this use client directive on the top of the file. Of course, inside code. And right now, if we encounter any error, we are gonna see this error page. For example, inside the home page, I will just say throw new error and error in home, for example. In this case, we will not be able to return anything. And as you can see, this is our navbar, footer, and between we have the error layout. In this example, of course, we are not going to encounter any error because we are not fetching any data or we are not doing anything that can cause any error. But when we create our database connection and fetch our blog posts, you are going to see how useful to use this error layout. And one more thing I want to mention, if I write here any other page that doesn't exist, let's say test, as you can see, it shows us this default 404 page, but if you want to, you can change here. Again, inside app directory, I will say not found.jsx. Again, I'm going to create my component and let's say not found. And let's write here something, h2 tag, not found, p tag, let's write this text. And after I will say a link, next.js link, and I will say return home. And the href will be our home page. As you can see, it's here. So if you try to reach any non-existing page, it's gonna show this not found layout. So you can return to home or refresh the page. Okay guys, layouts are like that. I'm gonna close everything and let me show you how you can style your components and pages. As you can see, we have a global CSS here. Basically, we are gonna add here our common styles. Let's give a background color. I will say body and background color, let's say black. And since we are using this CSS file inside our layout, this is the default import, I didn't add this here, it's gonna apply for every single page. Let's see, as you can see, home page, contact page, or any others. So what common styles we are gonna need? We can, for example, change the text color. I will say color white. As you can see, there is a default style for our anchor tags, our links. To prevent this, I'm gonna choose all these links and I'm gonna delete the text decoration. It's gonna be none and the color will be inherit. Basically, this color will be inherited from the parent. In this case, it's gonna be white, like that. So instead of writing our colors like that, let's create our variables. To do that, I'm gonna be using the root, and inside I will define my variables. First one will be background, it's gonna be this color, and the text color will be white. So right now I can use my variables here, and I'm gonna choose the BG. I will do the same thing here, it's gonna be text. So I can create other variables. I'm gonna paste them here. We don't have to waste time. As you can see, additionally, we have the soft background, the soft text color is gonna be this grayish color, and a button color. So we can use all these variables in any component or page because it's the parent CSS. As you can see, there is a space on the left and top. To prevent this, I'm gonna choose the universal selector. I will say margin 0, padding 0, and border sizing will be border box. In this case, we are not gonna have any default margin or padding. By the way, if you don't know what the root is, why we are using this selector, why we are using our colors inside body, I highly recommend you watch my previous CSS video. There are some awesome CSS tips and tricks. If you are interested, it will be in the card on the top right. Okay, right now to give a responsiveness, I'm gonna wrap my layout with a class name and change the size of that container. Let's check here. I'm gonna open my console. As you can see, our page is responsive. If I make it larger, we can see our image here. And this is how we are changing our container size. You are gonna understand better right now. I'm gonna open up layout. And after body, I'm gonna create a div, wrap my items, and the class name will be container. Let's use it here. Firstly, I'm gonna give a background and see whether it works or not. Okay, perfect. Right now, I'm gonna give a large size and I'm gonna center my container inside this body. So let's say width 1536 pixels and I will say margin auto. It's centered on the body and its size is smaller. And also I want to give padding on the left and right. Padding left, let's say 50 pixels and right. Okay, right now I want to give a minimum height so it can contain all our screen here. I will say minimum height will be 100 VH. So it's gonna fit inside our viewport. And I will separate my items. The navbar will be on the top, the footer will be on the bottom, and our content will be on the center. To do that, we can use flexbox, but if I do that, our items will be horizontal. To prevent this, flex direction will be column. Right now, they are vertical, and I'm gonna separate my items. To do that, I will use justify content, and it's gonna be space between. Okay, this is what I want. I'm gonna give the responsiveness, but before, let me show you how you can give a style for your pages and components. Because we are not gonna write everything inside this global CSS. Let me delete this background color, and I'm gonna open up my navbar here. And I will say class name, and let's say container. And I'm gonna create my own CSS file here. navbar.css and let's say container and background color is gonna be, let's say, blue. Let's import this CSS here. Import from navbar.css. Of course, not from. We are not importing any function or something. Let's check. And as you can see, there is something wrong. By the way, I'm gonna change this color. It's torturing to see this color. Okay, it can stay like that. As you can see, all our container is blue. If I open up my global CSS and change this background color, there is a conflict here because we are using exactly the same class name. It's a container and this is a container. So if you are using CSS, you will most probably see this kind of bugs. But thanks to Next.js, we are able to use module CSS. What I mean by that? Instead of navbar.css, I'm gonna change the name and I will say navbar module.css. Let's change our import. And this module includes our styles. Import styles from navbar module. Right now, instead of writing class name like that, I will just say styles.container. Let's see right now. And perfect. This is our main container and this is the navbar container. If you right click and say inspect, as you can see, this is our main container and our module style changes the name of the class name. it's not container anymore, it's this random generated class name. This is how we can prevent any possible conflicts. So you don't have to write different class name for your HTML items. Of course, if you are using Tailwind, you can directly give your style class names. You don't have to worry about CSS files. But there is something important here. If you are using Tailwind, you will create your styles easily. It's gonna be so fast. But if you wanna make some changes, it will be really hard to change your class names. Because sometimes we are gonna have a really long class name, even maybe 2 lines. So even if you try to make a little change, it's gonna be so hard to find the related class name. So in large projects, I prefer using a pure CSS, but if you are creating something quick, of course you can use Tailwind CSS. But as I said, it's not our concern for this tutorial. We are not gonna focus on designing. I just wanted to show you styling in Next.js. Okay, let's delete this. And here. And should I copy paste all these styles or I don't know, because I know some people want to see every little steps. Okay, let's do this quickly. I'm not gonna waste too much time, but I'm gonna show the steps. If you want to, you can skip this section. You can find the timestamps on the video player. If you don't wanna see the design part, just skip to next part. And for others, let's take care of this navbar. Firstly, I'm gonna give here a height. And I will say display flex, so my items will be horizontal. And let's center this vertically. Align item center. And I'm gonna separate my items. Remember how we did here? Just white content space between. Okay, I'm gonna increase this logo size. I will say class name styles.logo. So let's come here. I'm gonna increase the font size and font weight will be bold. Okay, let's separate those items. Again, it's gonna be display flex, but I'm gonna give a gap between them. To do that, I'm gonna open up my links and inside this folder, I'm gonna create links.module.css. I will say display flex, align item center, and I'm gonna give gap between my items. It's gonna be 10 pixels. Let's check our example here. As you can see, we don't have any class name. Styles.links. Let's import this quickly. Not SCSS, we are using just CSS, and perfect. But there is something important here. In our example, as you can see, when we are on the contact page, we have a different style here. When I click on about, it changes this background. So basically using this link, we are going to change the style of our links. To do that, instead of writing all those links in one file, I'm going to create another component here and it's going to be navbar link. JSX and CSS. I'm gonna create my component using the CSS file. As you can see, this is another snippet I'm using. As I said, you can find it in the previous VS Code video. And basically, this is gonna be a single link. So we are gonna need our link item. Remember, we have links here. Right now, instead of calling this link, I'm gonna call my component navbar link. And I'm gonna pass here my item is gonna be this link. And again, the unique key. Let's paste our link here. I'm gonna import. Right now, I'm gonna change this name. It's gonna be item. I'm gonna delete here. Okay, let's write here our class name styles.container. But also, if we are in the same page, we are going to change the class name. It's going to be active. To do that, let's copy this and use backticks. And I will say use the container class name. Additionally, if the path name is the title of our link, right here active. So we are going to need a condition here. But how we are going to reach to this path name? To do that, we are going to need a use path name hook. I will say path name use path name hook. It comes from next navigation. So using this name, I can write here my condition. If path name equals our item title, it's going to be styles.active. As you can see, if you are using next navigation hook, doesn't matter which one, it can be use path name, use router. If you are using a hook, it has to be a client component. And again, don't worry about this for now. I'm going to explain after giving styles. And let's open up our CSS, and I will say minimum width will be 100 pixels. I'm going to give some padding inside. I'm going to change the border radius. It's going to be 20 pixels. And let's say font weight 500. And I'm going to center my text inside this container. And if it's active, the background color will be text color. The color will be background color. The background will be white. Okay, there's something wrong. Class name is styles container and path name item title. It's not going to be title, it's going to be path. Because this path name includes this slash and the path name, not title. And as you can see, our active class is here. If I click here, perfect. It works. This is how we can give active classes. So I'm going to add 2 more items here. In our example, as you can see, we have the admin and the logout button. But if we are not the admin, we shouldn't see this admin link. And if we are not authenticated, we shouldn't see this logout button. Instead, we should show the login page. Of course, we haven't implemented the authentication, but we can write a temporary data here inside links. I will say const user or user session, let's say session. And for now, I will say true. And again, one more is going to be is admin, and let's say true again. Let's say here temporary. We are going to change here. And I'm going to write a condition here. Firstly, I'm going to check if we are logged in or not. I will say if there is a session, show something. If not authenticated, show something else. So if we are not authenticated, I'm going to call my navlink component and I'm going to pass my item. And it's going to be title login and the path will be login. And if we are authenticated, we need to check one more thing, is admin. Because if it's admin, we are going to see this link. If not, we are not going to see it. So one more condition here. If is admin, again, now link, title will be admin, path will be admin. And also I'm going to write here a button that we can log out. And of course, if you are using multiple items, you should wrap them with a parent. Let's use React fragments. Like that. Again, if we are authenticated, we are going to see this logout button. And if we are an admin, we are going to see this link. And if there is no user, we are going to see this login link. Let's check. As you can see, admin and logout. If it's not admin, we are not gonna see that link. And if we are not authenticated, it's gonna be the login link here. Okay, let's take them back and give a style. As you can see, we have some padding here, and I'm gonna change the size. Let's say class name, and it's gonna be logout. Padding will be 10 pixels, cursor pointer, so we can click. Font weight will be bold. Okay, it's not here. By the way, let's delete this. Class name, oh, I said logout directly, I didn't use my styles. Okay, awesome. So what about the responsive menu? Let's open up the console, and when I shrink the page, as you can see, there is a responsive button here. When I click, we can see our links. And after this breakpoint here, we are gonna remove that menu. We are gonna see our links here. To do that, we are gonna be using media query, but before, let's create our responsive menu. But first, I'm gonna create a use state hook, and I will say const open set open, and at the beginning it's gonna be false. Let's import. By the way, let's move our links here before this component. Okay. So at the beginning, our menu will be closed, but when I click here, we are gonna set our state and it's gonna be true. Of course, we are using a click event here. So if you are using any user interaction, your component should be a client component. Again, I'm gonna explain in detail, but for now, just know this. If you need an user interaction, the component should be a client component. Remember how we are doing this. At the top of the file, I will just say use client. So let's show our responsive menu here. But before, I'm gonna create a new div, and the class name will be container. And after those links, I will create a button. Let's say menu. Of course, later we are gonna be using this image, but I didn't explain how to use images. It can stay like that for now. And after that, I'm gonna check if the menu is open or not. If it is, I'm gonna create a div here, and let's say mobile links. And inside, again, I'm gonna be using my links. And for each link, I'm gonna call my now link. And the item will be link. And again, if you are using map, don't forget your unique key, link.title. One bracket is missing here. Okay. As you can see, we have menu button here. When I click on this button, on click event, I'm gonna set my state, set open, and I'm gonna take the previous value and write the opposite of this value. If it's true, it's gonna be false. If it's false, it's gonna be true. When I click, as you can see, our items are here. When I click again, it's gonna be closed. Okay, so let's give a style for them. The position of our links will be absolute, so we can see it on the right. Let's check. As you can see, it starts from here after this navbar, and the right position is 0. It sticks to right side. Let's do that. I'm gonna open up my links, mobile links. There is some autocomplete here. Let's complete and see. Position will be absolute. Top will be 100 pixels. Remember, our navbar is 100. It says left, but it's gonna be right. The width will be 50%. It's not gonna contain all the screen. And the height will be 100 VH, but remember it starts after 100 pixels, so we have to calculate this. So I'm gonna say 100 VH minus 100 pixels. It's gonna be display flags direction column, so it's gonna be vertical. And we are centering our items here, and gap between each item is 10 pixels. So we don't need this and this. I'm gonna open, and as you can see, it's here. Of course, the background color is exactly the same. Let's change it for now. Okay, perfect. Of course, for this large screen, we are not gonna see this menu button or this menu. We are gonna see it only when it's on the small screen. So let's use our media queries. I will say media, and the maximum width will be 768 pixels. And in this case, our links will be disappeared. We are gonna see our links here, but in this breakpoint, we are gonna remove them. Instead, we are gonna see this menu button and mobile links. So at the beginning, they are gonna be display none, but at this point, they are gonna be visible. So I'm gonna copy this and paste it here. And if it's not the small screen, display will be none. I will do the same thing for the button. Did I give class name or not? Okay, I didn't. Let's say class name styles.menu button. And again, display none. Actually, I can write it directly here. They are going to be display none. And at this point, we will be able to see our button. Let's say display block, cursor pointer. Okay, they are not here. We can see our links. When I shrink the page, our menu is here, but as you can see, it's overflowing. Because remember, our container size is really big. Let's open up the global CSS. As you can see, 1536. So we have to give responsiveness for this container first. This is the default value. So let's add our first media query. If the maximum width is 1536 pixels, the container size will be, let's make this bigger actually, 1366 pixels. And for smaller screen, if it's at this point, it's gonna be smaller. And for this point, 1024. And for 1024, 768. Those are common CSS breakpoints. You don't have to memorize anything, just Google for CSS breakpoints and you are gonna see those numbers. And for this screen size, 640. And finally, for this size, 475. Okay, if you remember, we have some padding left and right, and maybe at this point I can decrease those numbers. It's gonna be 20. As you can see, we don't have any problem anymore. When I click on this button, we are gonna see our menu here. And if I make this screen larger, it disappears and we see our links here. Okay. Right now we can take care of our home page, but before, let me show you how we can add images. Before using Next.js image, I want to upload those images to my public folder. I'm gonna come here and open up the public folder, and I'm just gonna drag and drop my images here. You can find them on the GitHub repository. So let's try to use this image inside our About page. I'm gonna close everything and open up the About page. If you are not using Next.js, we show our images using the image tag. Let's self-close this. And I'm just gonna write here source. I'm gonna choose the public folder using / and about.png. I will save. I'm gonna open up About page, and it's here. If I right click and open the image in new tab, as you can see, localhost about.png. So it's not changing anything. But if we check our code, you are gonna see here a warning, and it says using image tag could result in slower LCP and higher bandwidth, because we are not optimizing our images, but as it says, it might cause some performance issues. To prevent this, we are gonna be using Next.js image. As you can see, it comes from next image. And again, we will write here our source. It's exactly the same. About.png. We can pass here an alt tag. If you leave it like that, you are gonna have a problem because we didn't provide any size. If you are using Next.js image, you have two options. First one is giving here any image size, let's say 500 pixels, height 500 pixels. As you can see, there is no problem anymore, and our image is here. And if you check the image, right click and open image in new tab, you are gonna see that this is not our URL. Our image is inside _next folder. And if you remember, this folder includes our cached files. Basically, Next.js is not showing our images directly. Instead, it's caching it first and optimizing it for different screen sizes. As you can see, quality is 75%, and this image is much smaller than the image that we uploaded. And let me show you one more thing. I'm gonna close this menu. And as I said, you have two options. You can give your sizes directly, or you can create here a container, image container. I will say div image container, and I'm gonna wrap my image. Of course, we are gonna need a CSS file. About.module.css. Let's call it here. About.module. CSS and styles. Okay. Right now, since we have an image container, instead of writing here a specific size, we can just say fill. So it's gonna fill inside this image container. But there is something important here. If you are using a parent div, a container, its position should be relative. So I will say image container position relative. And you should give here a specific size. So let's say width 100%, height 500 for example. I forgot adding my path. Let's add quickly. Our image is here. When I open up my console and refresh the page and open up my image here, you can see that its width is much smaller. But if my screen is bigger, let's refresh again and open up. And right now, the size is much bigger. Basically, Next.js is optimizing our images according to device screen size. So you don't have to worry about optimizing your images, adding different images for each screen size. It's one of my favorite features. Let's close them. Of course, we are not going to use it like that. Our example will be like this. First, we are going to have a container here, then our image. And it's going to fit inside its container, its parent. But what about we want to add some external images? Let's open up pexels.com and I'm going to choose this image, for example. And I'm going to paste it here. Let's come back. And as you can see, there is an error. Let's check. And it says invalid source prop because Next.js doesn't allow us to use any external image URL. So we cannot use any domain here. We are allowed to use only localhost 3000, which is our domain. So I'm going to open my configuration, and inside this object, I will say images remote patterns, and it's going to be an array. And inside this array, you can add your domains, but also you can add additional configuration like protocol. It's going to be only HTTPS connection. And the host name will be the URL of image, pexels.com. If you want to, you can add multiple domains like that. I'm going to save. And let's refresh. And as you can see, there is no error, but we can't see our image. Because I added here directly URL. The page URL, it has to be the image URL. Like that. In this case, the URL will be images.pexels.com. Let's fix it. And let's check again. I'm gonna refresh. And it's here. This is how we are using external images. And if I check the image, again, it's gonna be in this folder and our image is cached right now. Okay, let's close here and here. And let's take care of our design, and after you will learn what the server component is, what is the difference between client and server component. But for now, I want to design my website first. Let's come here and check the home page. As you can see, we have two sections here, those texts and this image. By the way, I'm gonna make this a link. I will open up the navbar and let's say link href and the home page. Okay, inside this container, let's create two sections, text and image. Let's close everything and open up our home page. I will close my menu and I will say class name styles.container. Let's import our style. Let's create our CSS file, home.module.css. I will say container, and let's import this. Import styles from home module. Okay, inside this container, I'm gonna create two more divs. Let's say text container and image container. Inside this text, we have title, description, two buttons, and this image. So let's say h1 tag. I'm just gonna copy this. P tag. I'm going to create a div that contains our buttons, learn more, and contact. Styles.button, and one more, and it's going to be contact. And finally, one more div, and let's say brands. It's going to be our image container. So I will say next image. Source will be brands.png. I will write here a description. It can be empty, and I will say fill. And let's give a class name. Styles.brand. Let's say brand image. And finally, this image inside this container. I will say hero png, again fill. The class name will be hero image. Let's check our image here. I'm not sure if it's hero or not. Okay, it's test. Let's change this. And that's all. Let's give a style. I'm gonna move my CSS file here. And let's start with the container. It's gonna be horizontal, display flex, and gap between text container and image container will be. By the way, there is something wrong. Okay, I forgot adding here a slash. And here also. By the way, it's gonna be a GIF. Okay, it's here. Let's separate our items. Text container and image container. Remember, we are using an image, so I will say position relative, and their size will be equal. And since we are using flexbox, I can say flex1, flex1. So half of the container will be text container and the other half will be image container. Let's change here, image container, like that. What about here? Let's give a size. And again, position will be relative. Okay. But I want to change this color. It's gonna be this gray color. To do that, you don't have to change your image. Basically, just give here a filter and the effect will be grayscale. And it's gonna be 100%, which is 1. As you can see, right now it's black and white. Perfect. So let's come here and take care of those items. I will say display flex direction will be column. It's gonna be vertical and gap between items will be 50 pixels, like that. Let's increase this size. I'm gonna give class name, title, and for the description, let's write them here. I will say font size is 96 pixels. And for the description, it's gonna be 20. Okay, what about those items? Again, it's gonna be display flex, and I'm gonna separate them. Let's say 20 pixels. And for each button, I'm gonna give some padding, minimum width 120 pixels. We can click, so I will say cursor pointer. I'm gonna delete the default border. It's gonna be none. And the border radius will be 5 pixels, like that. But as you realize, this color is different. We can use our button variable. So I'm gonna choose the first child. I will say button, first child, and the background color will be variable and button. And the text color will be variable and text. So it's gonna be white. Okay, background color is not here. I'm gonna open up global CSS. Oh, because of the code plot. And perfect. So what about this footer? We didn't add here anything. As you can see, only our logo and this text. I'm gonna copy this and close here. And let's open up footer. Styles.container. Styles. Another div is gonna be logo and text. I'm gonna paste it here. And it's gonna be my logo. Let's import our style. Did we create this or not? Let's check. Okay, we don't have. Let's create quickly. And I will say container. Okay, again, display flags, and we will separate our items. Justify content space between. But as you can see, this size is bigger, but in our example, we didn't give any size. So it's gonna be 100 pixels. I will say align item center, by the way. We can center them vertically. And finally, the color will be gray. And for the logo, font weight will be bold. And for text, font size will be smaller. Just like this. Awesome. So let's check here. As you can see, it's exactly the same. I'm gonna open up the about page and we are gonna do exactly the same thing here. Text container, image container, and we are gonna have some texts like this title, bigger title, description, and those items. Let's do that quickly. I'm gonna close them and open up my about page. And I will take my CSS. Let's delete this and give here a class name. Styles.container. And again, text container, image container, and inside text, let's say h2 tag. I'll just copy and paste them. A p tag. And for those items, I'm going to create another div, let's say boxes, and we are going to have 3 different boxes. Let's create one of them, and after I'm just going to duplicate. We are going to have here a number, let's say h1 tag again, and a p tag, and I'm going to paste. And in the right side, I will say image. I'm going to say fill, and the source will be about.png. Let's delete here. Let's give a style. I'm going to delete this, and I will say container. Again, flags one, display flags, and gap between items, it's exactly the same. And for image container, flags will be 1. Awesome. Let's give class name for our items and after give our style. Styles.subtitle. I'm just gonna copy this. It's gonna be title and description. Okay. The title will be 54 pixels. I'm gonna change the subtitle text color and it's gonna be our blue color. So I will say variable and button. And for the description, font size will be 20 pixels and font weight will be 300. It's gonna be thinner, like that. And what about here? Let's create 2 more boxes. Firstly, they are gonna be horizontal and I'm gonna separate them. And after, I'm gonna change the color of this text. I will say boxes, display flex, align item center, and justify content space between. Just like that. Let's change this color and give space between this text and this one. So I'm gonna choose box. It's gonna be vertical, and let's give a gap. And I'm gonna choose the title, which is h1 tag, and the text color will be our blue color. I'm gonna save, and awesome. By the way, this image doesn't fit inside our container. To prevent this, I'm just gonna give here a class name. Let's say styles.image. And the object fit will be contain. Okay, it's much better. And what about the contact page? Let's check. This time our image will be here, and for the right side we are gonna create a form. I'm gonna close them and open up my contact page. As you can see, we don't have any CSS. Let's create. I'm gonna copy this right here, container, and import my file. And I'm gonna give class name here, styles.container. Okay. And inside I will say div image container and form container. Let's quickly create our image. Contact.png and fill. And here, let's create a form. I will say class name is gonna be form, and inside, let's create an input, and the placeholder will be, let's check, name and surname, email address, phone number, and message. And after, we are gonna create this button. Email address and phone number. And let's say optional. And I'm gonna create here a text area, and let's give a placeholder, and it's gonna be message. And finally, a button that says send. Okay. Let's open up our CSS module, and as always, display flex and gap between items. I'm gonna give flex for image container and the form container. And position will be relative. For our form. But before, where is our image? Let's give class name, and it's going to be styles.image. And again, object fit will be contain. For our form, flex direction will be vertical, and gap between items, let's give semicolon and try again. Okay. And I'm gonna choose my form input and also form text area. I'm just gonna give some padding, let's say 20, border radius 5. Let's delete this border. I will say none. I'm gonna change the background color. It's gonna be BG soft, and the color will be the text color. Okay, I didn't close this image tag. And now there is something else about our URL. Okay. Okay, they look nice, but we don't have our image. Oh, because we are using our image container on the left side, when you use it on the right side, it automatically assigns a height for this because the left side has a height here and the right side automatically takes this size. But in this case, since it's the first item, we have to provide here a height. So let's say 500, for example. Okay, awesome. What about this button? I will say form and button, padding 20, background color will be the blue color, and the color will be the text color. Font weight will be bold. I'm going to delete the border. Border radius will be 5 pixels and cursor pointer. Okay, so what about this blog page? Let's see. It includes our blog posts. So for each card, each postcard, I can create different React component. So let's create that component. I will close them, open up my menu, and inside components, I will say postcard. Let's create our JSX file and the CSS file. I will say container and create my component here. Let's open up our blog page. I'm gonna close them and open up blog. And here I will say class name styles dot container. I'm gonna create my CSS file blog.module.css. And I'm gonna import it here. Just like that. And inside, I'm gonna call my component postcard. Actually, let's call 4 of them. Just like this. And each card has 2 sections. This top section and this bottom section. In the top section, we are going to have our image and this date. And in the bottom section, we have title, description, and this link. Let's create. Inside postcard, let's close this menu. I will say class name styles.container postcard module.css. Let's say div top bottom, and inside top I will say div and image container, and we are going to have an image here just like that. Let's import this image from next image, and after this container we are just going to create a span and it's going to be our date. Let's give any date here just like that, and I'm going to give class name styles.date. And for the bottom, let's create our items. H1 title, p tag, description, and a link. Read more. Let's give class name, title, and description. Okay, let's open up our CSS and let's give our style. Firstly, it's gonna be vertical, top and bottom, and gap between items will be 20 pixels. And also I'm gonna give margin between each item. As you can see, there's a space here. So let's say margin bottom 20 pixels. And for the top element, display will be flags because they are going to be horizontal. And let's give a size for this container. Image container, let's say 90%, and the 10% will be this date. Height will be 400, and again position relative. And for this image, let's give our object width, and it's going to be cover. And for this date, font size will be small. And as you realize, we have a transform here. It's 270 degrees. It's not horizontal. To do that, I'm going to be using transform, rotate, and it's going to be 270 degrees. Let's check. Okay, we don't have any image. So let me open up Pexels again and choose this image. And I'm gonna paste it here. Remember, we can use images.pexels.com. And as you realize, our items are vertical, but in this example, our items are horizontal, and if it overflows, this container moves that item to other line, like this one. To do that, we can use Flexbox and FlexWrap. Let's open up our block module, and I will say display flex, and FlexWrap will be wrap. Let's give space between items. And for each item, I can give specific width. Let's open up our page, and for each card, I'm going to give a container, and let's say post. Let's remove them and duplicate like that. And for each post, let's say 30%. So we will have only 3 items per line, just like this. If I say 20%, we are going to have 4 items. If I say 50%, we are going to see 1 item because remember, we have a space here. But if I say something like 40%, as you can see, 2 items. It works like that. So for different screen sizes, we can give different size. Let's copy this. And I'm going to use my media query. For this size, for example, it's going to be 100%. But if the screen is bigger, let's say 1280 pixels, it's going to be 45%. So we will see 2 items. Let's see, I'm going to open my console and I will shrink. As you can see, 2 items. If I shrink more, it's going to be 1. Perfect. But as you can see, this date is on the center. I will say margin auto. Perfect. And what about this title? Font size 24 pixels and margin bottom will be 20 pixels. Just like that. For the description, again, margin bottom, font weight will be thinner and the color will be gray. Okay, awesome. But if I add something longer, let's use random generated text here. As you can see, it ends here. Maybe I can make this 90% also, so it will stay here. Just like that. It's much better right now. Maybe I can do the same thing for title. If it's long, it's not gonna overflow. Okay, and for this text, maybe I can give underline. So I'm gonna choose this link. styles.link. I will say text decoration and it's gonna be underline. Just like this. And what about the single post page? Let's check. I'm gonna click here. Again, 2 sections, image and our content. Let's do that. I will close them and open up. What was the name? Okay, single post page. And single post module.css. Import styles single post module CSS, of course from. Okay, let's use it here. Styles.container. And inside, let me close this menu. I will say image container and text container. And inside this image, let's say Next.js image. Again, I will use my image. Let's open up postcard and copy this. Just like that. A description, and I will say fill. And inside text container, we will have a title. Of course, all those items will be dynamic, but for now, for the design purpose, we can add here whatever we want. Class name will be styles.title. And after this title, we are going to have a div here which contains this user image, its name, and the date. Let's do that. I will say div, and I'm going to say detail. Again, we will have an image. Let's copy this. And the class name will be, let's say, avatar or user image, whatever you say. And for this image, styles.image is going to be the main image. Let's create one more div, and it's going to be detail text, for example. We are going to have 2 spans. The first one will be, let's say, detail title and detail, let's say, value. And the first one will be title author, value is this username. And I'm going to create one more, and it's going to be published and a date here. Let's give a test date. And finally, this description. After this detail, I'm going to create a content div. And let's say a random sentence. Okay, let's give our style. Again, I'm going to separate my items, but as you can see, image size is smaller than this content, this text container. So it's not going to be flex 1, flex 1. It's going to be much smaller. So let's take this here. Let's give our flex box, as we always do. Image container, flex will be 1, but for the text container, flex will be 2. Let's give position relative, and I want to make this image full screen. Of course, we have to calculate this navbar and this footer. Let's give semicolon here and say height. I'm going to say calculate. It's going to be 100 VH minus 200 pixels, because 100 plus 100 is 200 pixels. And let's separate our texts. gap between items will be 50 pixels. For title, font size will be 64 pixels. And for detail, again, display flags. Flags direction will be column. And gap between items will be 10 pixels. Let's check. Okay, there's something wrong. Image container. It looks okay, but object with cover, but it didn't recognize our size. Let's test. Oh, it might be because of this avatar. After detail, I'm gonna say avatar. Again, object with cover, and I will say border radius 50% because it's gonna be a circle, and I can give width and height here instead of this fill. It's gonna be 50 pixels. Oh, okay, it works. So let's take this back. Okay, perfect. Let's separate our items. Where is our text container? Okay, we already separated, but I didn't say display flags. Okay, for these details, I will give display flags, but it's going to be horizontal. So I mix these details and this text container. It's going to be flags direction column, and it's going to be only flags box. And let's say 20 pixels. Awesome. For those texts, again, I will say display flags, but this time it's going to be vertical. Let's check. Detail text. And gap between each item will be 10 pixels. And for this title, color will be gray, and font weight will be bold. And for this one, font weight will be a little bit thicker, but not bold. Finally, for this content, I'm gonna increase the font size. Let's say 20 pixels. I'm gonna save. Okay, perfect. So let's take care of our responsive design, and after that we can end the design part. Let's start with this page. I'm gonna open up my console, and if the screen is small, I'm gonna remove this image. Media, maximum width 768 pixels. And in this case, I'm gonna delete this image container. Just like that. But as you can see, this footer is overflowing. I'm gonna copy here and open up footer. If it's this size, the container will be flags direction column. And I'm gonna center my items. And let's change this space. It was space between, but this time it's gonna be space around. Okay, it's much better, but it's still overflowing. Let's check our navbar. I will close them and open up my layout. And I'm gonna remove this navbar. And as you can see, navbar is not the problem. So I will take this back. And let's open up our global CSS. As you can see, we didn't use this breakpoint. Let's use. And it's gonna be, let's say, 380 pixels. By the way, I'm gonna change this button. Let's open up navbar and links. And instead of this button, I will say image. Source will be menu.png. Let's give some size. It's going to be 30 pixels. And again, I'm going to use this on click event. I'm going to delete this. Okay, it's not here. Let's check our image. Okay, I forgot adding my menu here. Let's add menu.png here. Let's use it. I'm gonna refresh and it's here. Okay, let's delete this background, by the way. I'm gonna remove this. And for this image, styles.menu button. Right now I can click. Perfect. For this page, everything is okay. What about blog page? We already tested this. There is nothing wrong. Contact. As you can see, it's always horizontal and our image is getting smaller. To prevent this, after a certain breakpoint, I can make this container vertical. So let's take this, open up our contact page, CSS. And before this point, the container will be vertical. I will just copy this, open up about, and paste it here. Okay. And for those boxes, again, direction will be column. Gap between items will be 50 pixels and text align will be center. Just like that. Actually, I can center everything here. Just like that. And for the home page, again, it's gonna be vertical. Let me copy this and open up home page. Let's actually make this bigger. It's gonna be column. Let's remove that. And if it's smaller, I'm gonna decrease the title size, title font size, 64 pixels. And brands will be 100%. And again, I can center them. And those items. Let's check them first. I will say red background. As you can see, they are not centered. So I will say justify content center. Awesome. I can delete this. Okay, I don't want to waste your time. I was not going to do any design part, but anyway, when I skip any part, I don't feel satisfied because I know some people are still looking for the design part. So it was a good idea to not skip. So right now, let's see how to render components in Next.js. There are two types of rendering. The first one is server-side rendering, and the second one is the client-side rendering. Before single-page app libraries and frameworks like React, the traditional method was the server-side rendering. Let's create our user, the user browser, and our server. So when a user tries to visit a web page, let's say llama.dev/about page, after entering this URL, the browser page is empty. It will show a blank page. and our server takes this request. Let's do the same thing for the client-side rendering. Because this process is the same, we are sending a user request. Let's move this here. And for the server-side rendering, after getting the request, our server renders this page, creates an HTML file, and sends that file to the user browser. So this browser receives our rendered HTML file, and in this case, the user is able to see this page immediately. So right now our page is viewable, but this initial page is not interactive because it's just an HTML file. If there is something interactive like event listeners, animations, or whatever, the browser has to download the JavaScript files, but it's only for the interactivity. What about this client-side rendering? After receiving the request, our server sends an empty HTML file. There is nothing inside this file, and also the whole JavaScript bundle that will build our web application from scratch. Let's say empty HTML and the JavaScript bundle. In this case, the user browser has to render this page, not the server. And now we still see this white page because we have to wait until the page is rendered. Of course, I'm talking about just a few seconds and mostly even less, but anyway, the initial load is slower. And after rendering the page is viewable and also interactive. So here we are waiting for the interactivity, but here as soon as the page is ready, we can interact with it. So which one we should choose? Let's write cons and pros, and after you are gonna learn how rendering works in Next.js. I'm gonna write the pros first. Firstly, the initial page load is faster because remember, we can see our page immediately. We don't have to wait for anything. And since everything happens on the server side, it's better for old devices and slow internet connection. And the other one, server-side rendering, is better for SEO because the server response is an HTML file and the content is ready to read. But what about cons? Firstly, if you are using server-side rendering, you have less interaction. And you will have more server loads. Because for every single request, we have to render on the server, and it causes the slower subsequent page loads. And one more thing I want to add here, and it's hard to manage our states. State management complexity. What about client-side rendering? Okay, our initial load is slower, but once we create our single web application, it's much faster to navigate between pages after initial load. And since we are using the user browser, we are going to have a less server load, so it's going to be much cheaper. And the client-side rendering is best for the user interactivity. And it can affect our SEO. We are going to have slower initial loads, and our application depends on the client resources. So if you have a huge app, old devices might have some problems. In React, the default approach is rendering application on the client, but Next.js using the server-side rendering. When you create a page or component, they all are server rendered by default. But what if we need to add some interactivity? Click events, interactive charts, React hooks. So let's create here a website, and by default, it's a server component. Let's say server component, and the blue is client component. Right now, I'm going to create some components like a navbar. By default, it's a server component. Let's make this smaller. We can have a sidebar, chart, the content, and we can maybe have here a logout button and something interactive here. So let's say navbar, sidebar, chart component, our post details, a logout button, and something should render it on the client side. So these components will be client side components. In Next.js, we can combine our server and client components like that, and it's so easy to do that. The only thing I should do is write use client directive on the top of the client components. And after this directive, we can use React hooks and we can interact with the user. And this structure gives us an incredible flexibility. But we have to be careful here because during this hydration, we might have some problems. So let's give some real examples and try to understand the rendering and the hydration. Okay. Let's prove that all our Next.js components work on the server side. I'm going to open up the contact page. And here, I will just console log and I will say it works here. Let's open up our terminal. And as you can see, it works on the server side. If I open up my console on the browser, as you can see, there is nothing here. If I refresh the page, okay. Since everything works on the server, we cannot interact with the user. We cannot use the click event, we cannot use onChange event, or we cannot use the browser local storage. Basically, we cannot reach anything that browser allows us to do. If you want to interact with a user, your component should be a client-side component. To do that, I'm going to come here at the top of the file and I will say use client directive. And right now, as you can see, it's initially rendered on the server. But if I open up my console on the browser, as you can see, it works here. Right now, I can use my event listeners or local storage. So if I come here and say, for example, on click event and console log clicked. Of course, it's refreshing the page because it's inside a form and the default behavior is refreshing the page. Remember, to prevent this, we are using event.preventDefault. But anyway, this is just an example. If you want to use any event, you have to change your component into a client-side component. And as I mentioned, even if we write here use client, the initial render will be on the server side. This is important because you will most probably encounter hydration problems because Next.js checks your component on the server side first and it expects that you have the same component on the client side. What I mean by that? If I write here const a equals, let's say 1, and I will say console log 1, a. If I refresh the page, we are gonna see our number here and also here. We don't have any problem because this component is exactly the same on the client and server side. But if I come here and say use the math library and generate a random number, I will refresh the page. It's 0.70, but here, as you can see, it's 0.6. so they don't equal. If I try to use this variable somewhere here, let's say before this form, I'm gonna refresh the page, and as you can see, there is a hydration problem because in our component we are rendering 0.27 here, and on the server it's 0.72. And Next.js warns us that the text content does not match server rendered HTML. So how we are gonna prevent this error? Because it's a really common error. I saw many people ask this question on our social media accounts. So to prevent this, we have three solutions. The first one is using a useEffect hook. So during the hydration, we can call the useEffect hook and make sure that our component runs on the client side. Let me show you what I mean. I will come here and say useEffect, and it's gonna run on the initial render. And here I will make sure that my component runs on the client side. To do that, I can use a useState hook here. Const is client, set is client, and at the beginning it's false because it's gonna run on the server first. And when I run this useEffect, I will set my state and it's gonna be true. And using this is client state, I can conditionally write this a value. I will say if it's client, write here a. Let's move this here. I'm gonna save and I will refresh. And as you can see, there is no problem. Because on the server, this is not gonna be rendered. It's gonna be rendered only when it's client. This is how you can prevent this. Or you can prevent this error by disabling server-side rendering on specific components. For example, if I create here a component, hydration test.jsx, let's create our component. It's gonna be a client component, use client, and I will do exactly the same thing here. I will have this variable, and I'm gonna show it here. In this case, I don't have to make this component client. Let's remove them. And let's remove here. It's just an ordinary component. But what I'm gonna do is call my hydration test component. And instead of importing this component like this, I'm gonna use the dynamic import. What I mean by that? I'm gonna comment this out and I will say const hydration test, let's say no SSR. And I'm gonna be using Next.js dynamic, and I'm gonna import my component dynamically. I will say components hydration test, and at the end of the function, I'm gonna write here SSR false. In this case, it's gonna import this component without using server-side rendering. Let's call it here. Of course, I should write here import. I will save and let's see. I'm gonna refresh the page. As you can see, there is no problem. We don't have our error here. And here. This is how you can prevent the hydration problem. And one more thing you can do. Let's comment this out and get our random number from here. And let's say use client again. And I will write it here. But I'm gonna wrap this with an HTML element, let's say a div. And I will write here suppress hydration warning. I will refresh the page, and again, we don't have any problem. And it basically means, okay, there is a hydration problem, but I'm not gonna show you on the browser. Okay, this is the most common problem when it comes to rendering Next.js components. And let me answer the second most popular question. If I wrap my server-side component with a client-side component, is my server-side component is going to be a client component or server component? The answer is it's still gonna be a server component. Because sometimes we have to wrap our components with some client-side providers. Let's create another example here. We can have an authentication provider or context API provider, and it has to be a client-side component. Let's say tests or client-side provider test is going to be a component, and we are going to take a React children, and we are going to wrap this children with our provider. And I want to use this provider in my layout. Let's wrap this container. And I'm going to import. And I'm going to make this component a client-side component. Let's remove this, by the way. Actually, they can just stay here in case of you want to check it on the GitHub repository. I'm gonna comment them out. So if you need, just check the GitHub repository. And right now our provider is a client-side component, and we are wrapping the entire application with this component. So let's open up our home page or about page, doesn't matter. And I will say console log. Let's check where it works. I'm going to open my console. Oops, by the way. Oh, okay, I didn't refresh the page. There is no problem. I'm going to click and open my console. As you can see, there is nothing here. I'm going to refresh and we cannot see our text here. But if you check the server side, you will see that it works on the server side. So even if you wrap your application or any page or any component with a client-side component, don't worry, they will not be a client-side component. It's just a wrapper. Okay, let's comment this out also. And here. And right now, you know how server and client component works, what the hydration is. Client-side and server-side components don't affect each other. You can combine them. So let's learn the Next.js navigation. Let me create here another page. And I will say, oops. Navigation test. And I will say page.jsx and create my component navigation test page. Actually, let's make this lowercase and let's open up. Okay, the first thing is links. I already explained this. Remember how we are adding link here. We are using next link component, and inside this link, click here, and you should provide here any internal or external URL. Let's say the home page. The default behavior of a link is prefetching the given URL. So even if I don't click here, it's gonna prefetch our home page and it's gonna allow us to see our home page much faster, like that. But if you have many links on your component, you might want to disable this prefetching because it might cause some performance issues. To do that, you can come here and say prefetch and false. In this case, it's not going to fetch anything. Sometimes, instead of using a link, we have to implement some functionalities and after redirect our users to somewhere else. So let's create here a button, write and redirect. And when I click on this button, I'm going to call handle click function. Let's create this function here, const handle click. And of course, if you are using an event, your component should be a client-side component. And here, firstly, I'm going to write console log clicked. And after redirect my user to the home page. To do that, we are going to be using useRouter hook. So I will come here and say const router and useRouter hook. And it comes from next navigation. Don't use the next router, it's the older version. We are going to be using navigation. And using this router, I can push my user to the home page. I'm going to save, open my console and click here. As you can see, clicked and we are on the home page. Let's get back. So basically what push does is it performs a client-side navigation to the provided route. In this case, it's home page. But also you can use router replace. And in this case, it will not add a new entry into the browser history stack. What I mean by that? Let's refresh the page. Actually, let's open up a new tab here. If I turn back, you are going to see that home page. And if I click here, it's going to refresh my page. If I try to go back, as you can see, it's not going to go back to the navigation page. Instead, it's going to show my home page. That's because we are not adding a new entry to our browser history stack. And what else? We can use refresh. Basically, it's going to refresh our current route and it's going to make a new request to the server. So if you want to refresh your data, refresh anything, you can use refresh method. Let's see. I'm going to test here. I will refresh. When I click here, it didn't refresh because I added here a URL. Of course, it's going to refresh the current page. Right now, let's try. I will click. As you can see, it re-renders my components. Okay. What else you can do? You can create here back or forward buttons, for example. And using back method, you can open up the previous page. And let's get back. Using forward, you can open up the next page. If I click, as you can see, the home page. Okay, this is how we can use useRouter hook. As its name implies, it's a hook. So even if we don't have here any click event, your component has to be a client-side component because we are using a hook. So let's remember how we can use our path name. We are using path name and use path name hook. Let's import again. It comes from React Navigation. And let's see what's inside. I'm going to open my console. And as you can see, it shows me the path name. It starts with /. And if I write here any query, let's say test, it's not showing my query. It shows only my path name. But how we are going to reach this query? I will say const query and use search params. and I can get any query I want. Remember, in our example, it was Q. So if I say query, or let's say search params get Q. Let's write it here. I will refresh, and as you can see, Q is here. So you can search for any query you want, like sort query, like price query, anything you want. This is how we are using this search params hook. But as I said, those are for client-side components. What about server-side components? I'm going to write here, client-side navigation. So let's open up our Slack page. And remember, it's a server-side component. When we learned how to fetch data, we are going to fetch our data from a database. So it's better to keep this component as server-side component. But how I'm going to reach this Slack name? It's really easy. We can directly destructure our params here, and let's see what's inside. I'm going to open up my terminal, and let's check here a blog page, this one. And as you can see, our parameter includes a Slack, and it writes whatever it comes after blog. Localhost, blog, and post. If I say post test, and it's here. So if I do the same thing for my blog page, console log params. Let's open up the blog page. As you can see, it's empty. But what about search params? Again, you can destructure search params. Let's write it here. It's empty for now. But if I write any query, you can see your query here, destructure, and use it for fetching data or whatever you want. Okay, right now we know how to take our parameters or search queries. So let's see how to fetch data in Next.js. Of course, we are going to create our own blog posts, and we are going to fetch them using our database. But for now, for the learning purpose, let's use a fake API. To do that, we are going to be using JSON placeholder. It's a free fake API for testing purpose. If you come here, let's check posts. It gives the post title, body, and the user ID. So using this endpoint, let's try to fetch this data on our API. I'm going to delete here. And I will fetch this data. My component should be an async component because fetching data is an async operation. And here, let's create a function. I will say const get data async. I will say const response. Await. We are going to fetch from JSON placeholder and posts. Let's correct here. And it's going to return as a response. And I will check my response here. I will say if response is not okay, if there is an error, we can throw new error and say something went wrong. And if everything is okay, we can send our data. Of course, the data should be a JSON. So I will say return response.json. So using this function, I can retrieve my data. So I will say const posts await and get data. And using those posts, I can call my postcard. So let's delete them. I will say posts.map for each post, call this div. Of course, we are going to need a unique key, and it's going to be post.id, because remember, here id is unique. And I can pass my post here. And in this component, I can take this post and show the post title and post description. Let's see. I'm gonna refresh. As you can see, titles are here. But where is our description? No, it's gonna be body, not description. Okay, it works as we expected. And by default, Next.js caches the API responses, and it increases the performance. So if I visit another page and come back, it's gonna be much faster because this data is cached. This is the default behavior, but how we are gonna change it? By the way, let's close them. Okay, I'm gonna close my sidebar, and if you don't want to cache this data, you can write here an option. And I will say cache. As you can see, by default, it's force cache. You don't have to write it like that. It's the default. But if you don't want to store anything, you can just say no store. Right now, when you visit other pages and come back, it's gonna refetch your data. It's gonna be slower, but each time you will see the fresh data. So if you have any data on your database that is changing constantly, it's better to use no store. But if you have a blog website that you write once a week, it's better to use the cache. But also you can revalidate your data and you can give any duration. To do that, inside option, I will say next, revalidate, and you can write here any time period. So let's say 3600 seconds, which is 1 hour. So it's gonna refresh your data in every 1 hour. This is another option. So let's see our single pages. When I click here, it's gonna open up a single post. To do that, we can use this post ID. But in our example, remember, instead of ID, it should be a slug. When we create our database, we are gonna use it like that. But for now, for the test, we can use those IDs, post IDs. So I'm gonna open up the postcard again, and inside this link, I'm gonna wrap my text here and write here post.id. Let's check. When I click here, it's gonna open up blog page and this ID. Okay. Right now, using this slug, let's try to fetch a single post. To do that, again, we are gonna be using this API. And as you can see, we can use this endpoint posts and the post ID. You can change here and fetch a single post. Let's use it. I'm gonna copy this. Actually, let's copy here and open up our single page, Slack. I will say get data. Our component will be async component. And using this function, we are gonna fetch our post. Const post is gonna be get data. But remember, we should use here a post slug. So let's write it like this. And I want to cache this data, so I'm gonna remove that. And remember, using params, we can reach to our slug. Let's destructure this. Const slug is gonna come from params. So I can pass this slug here, and I can get that slug and use it here. And right now I can use my post. Let's come here, change this description, post.body. And where is our title? Here. Let's change it. And let's see. This is our title and description. And as you realize, we have a user here. And in our example, our post includes a user ID. Using this ID, we can fetch our user. Let's check. If I say users and the user ID, as you can see, it gives the username, email, and other details. If you want to, you can fetch this user here, and you can pass this post and this user. But if you want to, you can create another component just for this user and fetch the data inside that component. I prefer using this method because if you fetch data in one function, it's gonna fetch your post, and even if you have the post, you will have to wait for the user. So if you wanna increase the page speed, I recommend you to fetch your post first, and after using this user ID, fetch this user in other server component. Let's do that. I'm gonna come here, create a new folder, and I will say post user. Let's say post user JSX, post user module.css, and let's create our component here. And I'm going to open my single page. Let's cut here and paste here. Let's say container, username, title and username. Let's import our CSS. Post user module CSS. Let's open up our CSS. Here, I'm gonna copy this, paste here, and the first one will be container, title, and username. Okay, right now I can use this component here. As you can see, nothing has changed. And when we fetch our post, we will get a username, and we can pass this username to our component. So I will say user ID equals post.user ID.